Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Hello everybody and welcome back. This is the Crypto Realm and I'm Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to some very strange and wonderful reports brought to you by Paranormal UK Radio Network, the leading network in the UK for paranormal and strange encounters. And as always, I have a number of those for you tonight. We go back tonight to Isabella in the high hills of Scotland, and anyone who listened in last week will have heard that Isabella is a wonderful lady. She's absolutely lovely. I've met her in person and she's fantastic. She just has this aura of loveliness. That's the only way I can kind of put it. And she lives in a very unusual setup, we put it like that. She's in the middle of nowhere, really, in a very small cottage with not many neighbours. Certainly neighbours of the hairy kind, and we'll get to that in a second. And a long time ago, Isabella was in her garden playing with the dog, and she looked up and she saw what she described as a gentle giant. A figure stood on the hillside next to a tree, completely hair-covered, looked human, an ape combined, very similar to some of the Alma descriptions or the North American Bigfoot descriptions. And as you'll hear as the recording goes on, these are not the only tales of this creature, being, figure, whatever you want to call him. For today's talk, we're going to call him the forest folk. It's just the easiest thing. A gentle giant that lives in the forest and tries to avoid man as best he can. But this giant is a bit mischievous and he's not always in the mood for avoiding people, and sometimes seeks out their company. And we've had some very strange things that have happened down there. We've had gifts of rabbits left on the step. We've had footsteps outside windows and slapping and banging on the outside of cabins. And anybody who follows the habituations in America will tell you that's a very similar sounding set of circumstances. And tonight, I bring you up to date. We go to March now. And this is the Giant's Moonlight Chorus, and this is from Isabella. And it says, "Hello, Deb. Isabella here from the high hills of Scotland, where we've been stranded with snow and ice like much of the rest of the country this winter. This will be a short journal, but I think a significant one. I had no expectation in this weather to see or hear anything of the local Bigfoot clan, suspecting that, like the rest of us, they'd be holed up somewhere trying to stay warm. The fence that was torn down and rolled into a ball and set up as an obstacle for cars on the lane was replaced, and it stayed in place since the autumn. I don't know if that signifies the clan's acceptance of a force that they'd rather not oppose, since the landowner has come back with a strong message. I'm not sure if they've declared a truce or if there's been no particular reason for them to pull it down again. The Alpha can easily step over from what I saw of him, and the fence poses no real barrier for his purposes. It may have been that the younger ones were struggling, and that was the cause of his temper tantrum last summer when game was abundant, but barbed wire stood in the way of teaching their offspring to hunt on a clear path from Highland Locks to River. In any case, since the fence remained in place, my certainty that they'd moved on for the winter grew, and I stopped listening for them before Christmas. Uncharacteristically, however, and despite the wild weather, they stayed on this year. As mentioned in my last report, they gathered near the cottage to comment on a nearby estate's private fireworks at the New Year, exclaiming about the explosion of noise and bright lights with a typical blizzard of phony owl calls that gives them away. Their vocalising through the night during the supermoon surprised me too, and maybe a lot of other people in the area. The clan passed by with a booming chorus of hoots, I suppose on the way to the river to fish with the aid of a massive natural spotlight. This marked the first time I've heard their natural voices, as they dropped the obvious owl disguise and let loose with what I imagined to be sheer glee at the abundant moonlight, perhaps bringing a special energy to their night wandering. And then came the storms of February and March, feet of snow and sleet ice on the track that were sometimes inches thick. Now they'll retreat, I said to myself. I felt certain of it. But even now, the Alpha has once more made himself known. Very uncharacteristic and even disturbing in this bare landscape that offers no shelter or hiding place. Several weeks ago, I returned home from town at night and I parked the car and headed for the door when some odd type of night bird began to sing from the forest next to the cottage. It was a sound like nothing I've ever heard. It was melodious and trilling like a nightingale, but strangely intense. Intrigued, I stopped and listened as the sound grew louder, and the melody expanded in its complexity until I realised this was no bird, but some kind of alpha communication. The timbre was gradually more deep-throated and broad, the volume beyond the capacity of anything with feathers. The song, I feel certain, was a personal one that belonged to this particular creature and his experience of the wild. I unlocked the door and went inside, not sure what he would make of me listening with such interest. As much as I appreciate his right to live here, I'm wary of the boundaries that should exist for my safety and his. Inside the cottage, I opened the windows, wondering if the song would continue. Silence. The sound from the forest had stopped. The singing commenced and ended with my appearance in the garden, and it convinced me that the concert was meant for me to hear and nothing else. Why he's singing, I have no idea, and I'll admit to being a bit concerned for several reasons. The forest isn't safe so close into civilization this time of year. It provides no cover for the clan to pass through, and especially not the massive males of the species. In the snow, they're likely to leave footprints, and who knows where that would lead. I suppose the Alpha knows all of this, and his attraction to the cottage regardless is a worry. What's his message? As it's the dead of winter in this part of the world, and nothing to do with spring sap rising, I'm avoiding interpreting his song as a Bigfoot crush, and supposing that the melody is one of friendship or loneliness, or just being jovial and wanting to say hello. Maybe others in the habituation scenarios could contribute their ideas on the meaning of his song, an appropriate response, or whether I should take notice at all. Another recent development contributes to my worry that our Alpha shouldn't be so close to civilization at this stark time of year. Twice this week I've heard gunfire after midnight, on and on. Who fires repeatedly into the darkness? To my way of thinking, only people who are afraid, or people aiming high-powered rifles with heat-seeking scopes trained on targets larger than any man. So Deb, life in the hills of Scotland has taken on a new turn. Another chapter in this habituation that leaves many more questions than answers. What is the Alpha's point in staying on and trying to communicate? And what's all the recent shooting about? Does this relate to his insistence on staying close? It's a worrying time, and when I wish I knew a lot more about these creatures than I do. I'm inviting anybody with experience in habituation or serious research background in Bigfoot behaviour to please chime in with their thoughts. Wishing all in the UK a safe weekend, as this apparently promises to be another doozy. Take care and goodbye for now. Isabella. I think the questions Isabella raises are very valid ones. Firstly, why would a creature stay in an area if it was under threat? My personal opinion is that Scotland is one of their last forever homes. Still vast areas, mountain ranges, fast-flowing rivers, the salmon run, the deer run. It's ideal. It's as near to wilderness as people in the UK can get, I think. There's a similar situation in Wales and much further down south, and of course Northumbria. But we have to surmise, theorise, question habits. Do they migrate? Do they go from area to area and follow the food? Are there areas where they stay forever, all year round? The simple answer is we do not know. What we can do, and we're in a lucky position of, is that we can watch through the eyes of Isabella and the other people experiencing this behaviour over the years to come. And maybe that will bring us some of the answers. Why is it only certain people that they seem to show themselves to? Why do they show themselves when surely life or death would be much easier for them to hide away and let us walk on by? So what are these special relationships, habituations, whatever name you want to put on them? They are relationships, a to in and throw in, a backwards and forth of communication, whether it be stick figures or cries in the night, strange bird noises, or just a feeling that you know that they are around. And there are certain people that have this week in, week out in the UK. And then there are other areas where only for a very short period of time, even sometimes it's only 10 days in the year's cycle, where signs are shown or sightings are made. It may be that there's an importance to that area and that's the reason it's being visited. It could be that there's a food source or a useful source that's there only for that limited period of year. We really don't know. But it's through journaling and the habituations and the researchers out there taking notes and data that we'll build up a kind of picture of habits. And this is the reason we call them habituations. But we will carry on now in Scotland, as I want to stay in this area where Isabella is, because we did have another update from her, and here's what she had to say.
Thank you for joining me. I have some lovely news from Isabella. And a strange coincidence I'll explain all as we go. So, in a loch not too far away in the north of Scotland, a leading UK researcher, many of you know Stu Hill, took the chance of a break to camp wild alongside the loch in there, just to enjoy the river really in the forest. Little did he know that in the forested land behind the trees lies a small cottage where a giant visits from time to time. I didn't tell Stu what wonders abound in the area, and the current exclusion really due to the landowner and everything that's been going on. And on the 20th of June, he contacted me from the lock-in, and he said that late in the night he'd heard grunts and loud noises coming from within the trees. It was then that I explained what I knew of the area and what had happened there to him, and we both said, now wouldn't it be strange if Isabella had got action and heard the grunts too? Not really daring to think it could be true. Now, Isabella hasn't been in touch for a while, and all has been quiet since the new year. And I saw the destruction for myself when I went there, I think it's about 6-8 weeks ago now, with Darren and Chris. Everything had been cut down, everything was being fenced off. It was basically making where would have been cold food, that area, it was making it impossible to visit. So we thought that maybe everything was over and done with. And it's been quiet everywhere in the UK. Everything started up much later in the year. So as I say, Isabella's not really been in touch for a while about the giant. We have spoken, we've kept in touch, but she's not had any sign really since New Year. So you can imagine my delight after speaking with Stu. I go to my email and I find a message there waiting for me from Isabella. And I think, once again, two worlds collided in a sequence without the knowledge of either party. Whilst one hears the grunts of a clan, maybe, the others left the gift of thanks. How many of us are within a few feet of our hairy friends sometimes without even knowing it? And this is what Isabella had to say. So, this is June the 20th, so the morning that after Stu had heard the commotion in the trees, this is what happened. So it's Isabella here from the high hills of Scotland, Deborah. It's been months since my last report, although I've hoped after the encouraging visit from you and your team in May, the activity here would perk up and there'd be more to say as summer approached. But all remained quiet and eerie around the cottage, and the clan seemed to be hiding or have moved away. I'm sure you remember from your afternoon here that there was the construction underway of miles of fencing over the estates, and lots of high brush, rhododendrons, hedgerows of all kind had been cut back to stumps and even rooted in some places. Now the woodland next to the cottage was cleared, especially an area all along a deep ravine that falls away to a lovely burn where you'll often find deer and pine martens and otter. And I've never seen such purposeful destruction for no apparent reason. That is, no apparent reason if you discount the violent removal of the original fencing last autumn, when it was pulled out by the cement sunk post, rolled into a massive ball, and thrown into a farm lane. That behaviour, most likely from the alpha of the clan, obviously precipitated a war with the landowner. Evidently a war that continues. There was a lot of shooting into the woods at night throughout the spring, and as I pointed out to you and the other researchers, just behind the first row of new fence, a huge pine tree, about 2 feet in circumference at the trunk bottom, had been snapped off 5 feet above the ground and the entire tree thrown into the woods. A second tree, much larger, on the other side of the road beside the river, was also shattered in the same way earlier this month. But no sign of the clan this high up on the hill since early spring. In fact, I stopped venturing into the forest to search for signs because I feared attracting the alpha up here again with everything that was going on. I'd half hoped the clan was very happy somewhere else, not wanting to see them in constant confrontation with the estate owner and possibly injured by gunfire. I do think it would be difficult to kill a Bigfoot with a deer rifle, but the damage could be terrible nonetheless and really unnecessary. In any case, I thought the visits here were a thing of the past. I checked the hidey hole over the lane where the big alpha used to sit and watch me writing at the dining room table after dark. And it's gone back to some extent, but the big box-shaped rock that sat inside it is gone now. So there's nowhere for him to rest. Whoever cleared that area did a very thorough job of it. I kept my eyes open and listened whenever I got my dog out for the last constitutional before bed. That's when I'd usually hear owl calls and thumping or tree knocks in the forest. But the first sign I've had any hope at all that the clan are still in contact came just this week in the daytime. Having closed in fields all over the estate, the fencing contractors were evidently finishing the entire project by shutting off access to the forest next to the cottage late last week. Funny, they left this to last, I thought. Watching them set up their work, posts and wiring were laid out along the lane and they were hard at it with a massive hydraulic pile driver every 8 feet or so another fence post. Then suddenly, everything was back on the trailers and they were gone. All this week I expected them to return, but there's no sign of them at all. The owner of the estate has been away for quite a while, and he returned only last night. He was out this morning to inspect, and then into the woodland with his Gunshots erupted and continued for a long, long while, and I was relieved that for once he was firing in broad daylight. The clan travel at night, from my experience, except with the very first sighting of the alpha, which was in an area high above the cottage on the edge of a deep pine forest. I figured the landowner's target must be vermin or some of the infestation of doves that ravaged the roofs of houses around here, digging under moss and between the slates and leaving a general mess. Feeling certain that the clan was in no way involved, I was simply anxious to get out to the grocery shop and listen for the shooting to stop. The farm lane passes directly by the wood, and I wanted to avoid getting too near in my car. As soon as the forest fell quiet and stayed that way, I headed for the front door to make my escape. I grabbed my shopping bags and flung open the door and stood back in shock. On the doorsill sat a small, frosted, mangled cupcake. It looked torn in half. The frosted top severed from the plain bottom, then set back together and left on the sill. I stepped over it and looked around and glanced into the woods, and then hurried to the back to have a look in the long ditch that leads up the hill and away. There was no one or nothing there. Returning to the cottage, I considered what to do. I decided to leave the cupcake where it sat and come back and photograph it once I'd done my errands. This was a big mistake. When I returned, it was gone. Whether taken by squirrels or by the original donor, I don't know. But I'm here this evening with a very heavy heart. Whether or not you owned an important estate in Scotland, would you really, truly wage war with a creature delivering a cupcake? Would anybody? And is it brave or just completely foolish to insist on sharing a prized tidbit, most likely scavenged from the rubbish bins at the bottom of the hill, when such danger awaits you? Who else do you know so completely unselfish, loyal and brave? I'm not exaggerating in the least. It just leaves me in tears. That's all for the moment, Deb, and I'll sign off until the next time. Ever yours, Isabella.
I think Isabella's latest journal just brings to the fore the worry, there's this dividing line between what we do as researchers and are we putting these creatures at harm? You know, are the forest folk being hunted because of us? And I think there's a lot has happened in the area, and I don't think it's necessarily that the guns have moved them out. And it could be, and I could be completely wrong. But I'm in a fortunate position where I've been able to look at a number of other areas in Scotland that have this similar setup. The others where a single lady lives out there on her own and she's had similar interaction. And there are periods where they do seem to go. And in the second area that I'm speaking about now, much further north, there was a time when the loggers moved in and all interaction stopped for a number of months, and both myself and the lady were really concerned that the loggers had moved them on and that was it. They'd never come back. But it was more like the kind of the halibut effect, as they call it, where they moved from an area until the loggers moved out. They gave it a couple of weeks to kind of go back to normal, and suddenly the signs started again. And I did wonder when I got the journal from Isabella, and I thought, this won't be the end of it. We will hear more. I think with everything that's happening on the property, and I do wish I could divulge everything, and unfortunately I can't. But there are people that would like to buy onto the land because there's a very fast-flowing river quite at the side of it, and that could be used for some kind of hydro dam. I think you get where I'm going with this. It's a part of Scotland that we don't want dams and wind farms and anything like that happening, but it's an ideal place to put them. So there's a bit of a battle going on, we think, at the moment. And also, this clearing of shrub and brush is very unusual on an estate like this. Normally that is left for the wildlife because it encourages the wildlife to come in. This seems a complete opposite of that, but we can't comment. There are other properties on the land that are completely empty and not for wreck or ruins. They're beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and you could walk in tomorrow and take up home there, but they're empty and they sit there empty and we don't know why. This is all speculation, but hopefully as the months go on we might be able to answer that to you. And today I'm in a unique place where I've never been able to do this before. I have another update from Isabella, so I'm bringing it to you as we speak, and I haven't read it. You're going to read it at the same time as me. So here we go. This is the 31st of July 2018, and she says, "Hello again, Deb. Isabella here from the high hills of Scotland with further news of our furry friends. We've turned another corner with the habituation on the mountain, and events are moving forward in the contest between the local clan and the landowner. I thought your followers might be interested in developments, as the world in general faces a meltdown in the environment and what we'd all counted upon as a normal behaviour of nature. We've gone through a portal, I feel, into new times, and we'll never go back to what we once knew. Likewise, the sides here are clearly drawn, and there's a stressful alignment of businessman versus forest people. The erecting of fences that was underway when I last contacted you is now finished, and the end of the woodland is completely closed off, just over the lane from the cottage. As I'd mentioned about a month ago, there were posts driven into the ground every 8 feet or so by a pneumatic pile driver, and rolls of fencing laid out along the ditch. Then suddenly all went quiet and the workmen fled. Within days the posts were ripped out like so many toothpicks and scattered along the edge of the forest. I held my breath and waited to see how the landowner would react. Eventually the muddy posts were collected, loaded onto a truck and taken away. A week later someone delivered their replacements. Huge round pointed logs that would create a barrier of about 6 feet high. Then came another pause, and the logs lay there like so many great dead bodies in the rain. When the sky cleared, the pile driver was back, and one by one they were pounded into the ground with enormous force. It was obvious the estate owner was making a counter-move to the Alpers' anger and intended to win this war with the clan one way or another. Meanwhile, the commercial rubbish bins at the foot of the estate were replaced. So no more flip-top lids, but bins with large curving tops reinforced with steel. Lids that had to be rolled back with a low set handle. For a while, this appeared to have foiled the clan's access. But within a few weeks, every one of those new containers was torn through along the edge of the lid. Steel metalwork and all. Even the youngest of the clan can dip in at will to enjoy leftovers from the estate. Several days ago, the crew returned to finish the fencing project next to the cottage, with heavy gauge metal and electric wire along the top. I was working in the front garden and I watched the access to the woodland slowly narrowing and closing, supposing that this might be the end of easy travel for the clan, and perhaps the end of our strange and wonderful association. When the crew had departed, I grew up a chair at the glass-top garden table and took a break with a cup of tea and some biscuits, marking the conclusion of an era. There'd be many easier places for the clan to cross from the river and the estate rubbish bins, their favourite nighttime raiding spots. Now, there'd be no phony owl calls in the darkness, nobody thundering by at midnight, slapping the side of the cottage in greeting, no whoops and answering calls as the clan headed en masse to the river for fishing under a full moon. I glanced over towards the Alpers' hidey hole that had only begun to start to grow back, it having been shorn away by the forestry crew as they surgically removed every area of thicket and overgrowth last spring. The great rectangular stone where he'd sat and watched me through the dining room window has been removed and deposited next to the gates of the estate some time ago now, as though in warning or maybe even a mark of domination. Or perhaps the Alper had taken the stone from there in the first place. A woven tangle of branches that had decorated the entrance to his lair was now gone as well. Everything had been done to dethrone him, to destroy his quiet reign, to collapse his hidden kingdom. Unsure what to expect next, I gathered my tools and garden gloves and teacup from the table as the rains began falling again in the quiet mist. I spent the rest of the afternoon baking bread, and it was several hours until, putting away my garden gear, I realised I'd left one cloth glove on the table outside. Back out I went, but it was gone. I searched the beds I'd been weeding and found nothing. I'd been nowhere else, and the glove had clearly disappeared. The following day, now wary that the clan might be trying to message me with their behaviour, I was up early and outside with my dog to let him run. Weather reports said that we'd have rain all day, but so far the sky was cloudless. It's a space where I've known the clan to relax and feel safe. We headed towards the back of the property, Right away, some important change was evident. It was a space where I'd known the clan to relax and feel safe. A fenced lawn where the dog runs, and beyond that a small orchard and a row of old graceful maple trees that border fields sweeping away from the cottage and uphill for a few miles to high pine forests. A few years ago, after a disruption in telephone service, a BT crew had been out there to cut limbs from one of those gigantic maple trees, so all the lush foliage that cascades 50 feet to the ground and shrouds an entire corner of the property. They manoeuvred a cherry picker crane into place and sawed away 2 great branches, and then there was a shout. They were shouting as they scattered. It was a while until BT reclaimed the machine of theirs. A hole remains in the maple canopy, gradually filling in each summer, and I'd come to visualise that corner as a perfect nesting place for female members of the clan and their young, with useful hiding places for sentinels high above the ground. I wasn't surprised when the BT crew ran away. At any rate, on the morning after my glove was taken, both gates were hanging open to the back garden and the orchard beyond. I was sure I'd closed those to keep the rabbits out. One of the wooden clothes poles along the dry stone wall next to the field was snapped off at the ground and laid along the fence. the shattered base pointing towards the mountain top. I never hang clothes back there, and the poles are rather slimy and waterlogged. I don't harvest all the fruit either, but I leave some for the clan. There are apple and pear, cherry and plum trees, currants, gooseberries and raspberries, and I've long thought this could be a treat for them, after a fish meal and dips in the dumpsters down the lane. In my mind, we share this area, the clan and I. Inspecting the broken clothes pole for handprints, I found smears all the way around in 2 places. My missing glove might be a coincidence, but this certainly wasn't. Even so, anybody I'd tell about these discoveries in my garden would find an explanation of how these things just happen. Most people would watch what's going on here and never make any connection to the Forrest family, who are true regents of this place. Meanwhile, you and I both know, Deb, that the clan is telling me nothing will prevent them coming by and making full use of anything we've agreed to split between us. Fence or no fence, that alpha swooped in and claimed my glove in the light of day. He left the gates ajar and made it obvious he'll be anywhere around the cottage as he pleases. He obviously knows how to open the gate latches in my garden, which means he can also open them on the now enclosed woodland. He operates with brute force or fine dexterity, whatever the situation demands. Nobody and nothing are going to stop him. Not guns, and certainly not electric fencing. He is still king, although I'm the only one up here who knows it. And now your readers will be assured as well. That's all the news for now, my friend. Back to pruning roses and herbs. I wish you a happy harvest as we roll down the year towards autumn. Isabella. Oh, that brought a lump to my throat, I'll be honest, reading that. It was, being able to have been there and see the area, it must be incredibly hard, I get that. I can imagine the places that she's talking about. And it brings to mind something that we've been rolling around discussing. There is a certain time of the year, and I'm wondering if the American and the Russians are also experiencing this as well. For some reason, round about August, September, places that we normally feel really, really welcome suddenly become as if you've stepped into somebody's bedroom. You get that feeling of being watched, that you're not welcome, and you're out. And the researchers have all reported it this year, that the woods kind of go a bit creepy at this time of year, and we don't know why. And the theory that one of us or a few of us have bounded about is that maybe this is the time that they have their young. It could be that that's why we are only seeing the males. Only males are being reported, because the females and the young are somewhere else, quite safe, with food close by, running water and lots of protein. Now that sounds like Isabella's land to me. And I understand what she said, that as I would imagine, the back garden is a lot different than what Isabella describes as a back garden. Isabella's back garden is basically open fields to woodlands and then onto lochs and then onto mountains. It's absolutely beautiful. And as we said before, there are no cherry trees up there, and yet cherry branches and cherry whips are brought to her quite often. And I think there's been a kind of gifting going on even before Isabella realised that the giant was there. She has always tended that garden and never minded if any food went. She would put it down to, local rabbits or whatever. The deer, there's a lot of, I nearly said protein moving out there. There's a lot of animals and wildlife moving around out there. And she'd always put it down to that. And then we have the estate bins, where we don't have to bear-proof bins in the UK, and we don't really have any raccoons or anything like that. Rats are a problem, so most people will put like a brick on top of their bin, or there's no locks, there's nothing like that. So why he would have to go to the extent of buying the roll-top bins is beyond me. I don't know why they would do that, but there might be a practical reason for it. There's not a whole lot of other than Isabella around there, really. There's sheep pens and, stock equipment and things like that. We didn't see a whole lot of human presence, I'll be honest. Obviously, until you drive out, and then as you go down the road, then you start to see people. But nowhere, I wouldn't class it as a village. I would say the nearest, what they describe as a town, to me is a hamlet. It's a very small place, very traditional Scottish, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And there are lots of tourist areas nearby, but we saw some walkers on the lower grounds, but we didn't see a whole lot of people when we were out there. And it brings me back to what we were talking about. I don't think that they've gone very far. And I think the area where Isabella is ideal for food, comfort, somewhere to stay. There's a human around that really doesn't mind you being around and will go out of her way to help you. I think she gives off this energy of welcoming and helpfulness. So this relationship, we'll call it, has been going on for a number of years now. And a trust is building. So for some people would say, oh, this is just nothing. This is just, it's just circumstance. It's just coincidence. And maybe so. It could very well be so, couldn't it? But seeing, when she's had eyesight on the giant, then we know it's not just coincidence. There's certain things that happen that stand out to you. Now, this is a lady who lives in the middle of nowhere. She's used to the noises out there. She's used to the strange things that happen out there. These are extra strange. These are out of the ordinary. And that's what makes her question them and wonder. And the way I see it is to journal it, to write it down. It's never lost. She could be up there on her own, not telling anybody about any of this. Circumstances may change and that story will become lost forever. But this way we have it. And that brings me on to the area itself. Now, if it was just one lady's word, I would still, because I've met the lady and I've stood in front of her, I will always believe her because I know that she is telling the truth. But if I only had her word to go on, I would still believe her. But I understand that that's not enough for other people. So we have to ask ourselves, when was the earliest mention of anything described as, say, a Bigfoot, a forest folk, a wild man? This man ate almost hybrid mentioned. And we have to go to a document that's called, you'll find it in an archive if you're looking for it, and it's the history of the ancient, and it's the history of the ancient Caledonia, obviously for Scotland. And it says, it was a gentleman who sent it to me because he had an interest in the subject and he'd found this rare account from Scotland. Back then it was Caledonia. He passed the information on to Bigfoot Tony. Most of you will know him from YouTube, and he passed it along to me. And it says, the gentleman says, I found an account of a Sasquatch Bigfoot type creature in an old history book that was printed in 1879 called The History of Ancient Caledonia by John McLaren. And on pages 29 and 30 it says, now in the grandson of MacIntyre who rebelled in Gaul and broke off from Lazarus and Daniel and went to Birmingham, being there oppressed with Satyrus or man-monkey of a prodigious size, yet they were forced to leave that place and come to St. Lawrence of Dundee for protection. This race of man-monkey lived chiefly on fish. They had no language, but seemed to understand each other by fearful screaming and roaring. They were mischievous to cattle, and the inhabitants became afraid of them. There was nothing that frightened them except fire, and when the inhabitants heard them nearby, they would set fire to the heat to frighten them, though of course, over time, they would come back. When they became familiar with human beings and stopped being scared of them, and it was dangerous for the women to go out. And these Gauls legged it to Dundee. They were that frightened, and they said that you couldn't take over the land. And this would have happened somewhere around, we're in the AD, so like 6 AD, 5 AD. I'm not a historian, I'm not 100% sure. But then we have other historical accounts. The Big Grey Man is often said to be Scotland's Bigfoot, and the stories go back hundreds of years. And in the 17th century, a man of the Clan Murray was reported as having captured a wild man in Craigieburn Rocks and chained him up. The chained wild man still appears in his family's heraldic shield. The next written report that happens was in 1791, and that's the ancient legends of Leith, which is a Scottish legend. It's I can bring it to you another week. It's in the Craigieburns area, all the way up to Ken gone. You have Ben McDew. You have the running man, the big grey man. This probably a Bigfoot. I'm not too certain. I can't be sure. I'm not an expert on anything, me. But I will bring you the accounts, and they all talk about a tall running figure that can be seen or can be heard. And I'm going to bring you a few of those, not the accounts from there, but from around Isabella's area, because there are other accounts from where Isabella lives, from the past as we've just been, all the way back down to not that long ago. And we have a really interesting one here. And it's called, this happened on the Drumocta Pass. And the Drumocta Pass is used by a lot of long-distance lorry drivers, and it's an area that you use to pass through the Highlands. And in lots of areas along that road, if you could imagine Washington State or something like that, and you were just driving down this continuous road, this long winding road that you see in the car adverts, it's like that, it's beautiful. And a motorist was northbound on the A9. At the Drumocta Pass, when he described two individuals, he called them, cross the road in front of him, and he described them. One was very large figure, approximately 7.5 feet tall, and the other was about 2 foot smaller. They jumped the barrier and disappeared out of sight, and he thinks he was travelling at about 45 to 50 miles per hour. He described them as large and covered in brown hair. And the time of the sighting was approximately 2 a.m. in the morning. And that was in 2014, so not that long ago. And we'll go down a little further, and we're still around Isabella, and we're not going to go more than 15 miles away from her house when we start talking about these sightings. We have the Corrie Boffer. And I added this one because it's a strange set of circumstances, and I'm not saying it's a Bigfoot. What we get interested in is also what's happening around the Tay Forest, what other stories are coming in around the Tay Forest. Pardon me. And we have the tall grey man of Corrie Boffer, 2005. Now I feel that this could be a Brocken Spectre, and a Brocken Spectre is a kind of optical illusion. When you're up high up on the mountains and the sun's at the right angle, you can actually reflect your own shadow onto it. But I wasn't there, so, and this is what the gentleman had to say. I was standing alone outside Corrie Bothy at night, and it was the middle of winter. Leaning up, well, he said night, so it can't be. That's my Brocken Spectre theory out of the water, isn't it? Leaning up against the wall near the window, having a smoke, and looking out into the snowy darkness, out of the corner of my eye, over to the left towards a stream. I caught a glimpse of a tall grey figure. At first, I thought it was one of our party, although all of them were inside the buffer. I turned to look properly, and I couldn't see anyone. Probably just a suggestion or a suggestible mind playing tricks in the half light, but it gave me a little shiver. I quickly finished my smoke and headed back in for the warmth and the company, and I don't blame him. Yeah, but this is just one of many, and I'll take you down to another one in just a second. We have Loch Tay Howells, and this is the summer of 2014. And this has happened on the Kerry Moors estate, which is just at the north point of Loch Tay. And it was a conversation that was taking place between two employees of the local estates, and they were having a chat about walking up the hill north of Kenmore. And one chap in his mid-50s said to the other chap, who was about 20 years younger, the young lad had attempted to stay out all night the previous year, and stated he had felt as he and his friend were being watched. He also claimed he heard howls like sounds from a close proximity to their location. He genuinely looked quite affected by the experience, and he states he'll be attempting again in the near future to do it. I told him to let me know how he gets on. The older chap mentioned that there have been strangely bird-like creatures seen in the area over many years, and that gentleman that sent me that in is actually a wild camper from the area, and he's going to continue to do that and send any more that come in. So what else have we got? We've done that. The Licks Toll is an area that's just to the southeast. One sec, let me just pull it up. I'm working on my map here. There we go, got it. This happened in 2015. And it came directly from the witness, and it was reported to Charmaine Fraser. And he's a delivery driver, and he reported a strange occurrence that happened around June 2011. This is suggestive, but still worth recording. I can't remember the exact date, but it was about 4 years ago. And I was stopped near Licks Toll, near Killing, for a topograph break. I woke up from sleep and to find the truck shaking and thinking I was dreaming. I was parked in front of the forestry gate. I got out of my truck and investigated, but there was nothing there. This was, I remember, round about June time. So that's another set of strange, occurrences that are happening. And then we also have a strange tale from Weem Wood, which is not too far away. And that lies just to the northwest of Aberfeldy in Perthshire, and it's the ancient woodlands of Weem. Perhaps due to its prehistoric beginnings, the woods have numerous legends and supernatural stories associated with them. The name Weem was developed from the Scottish Gaelic, and the word is spelled A-U-A-H-M, and that's Weem in Gaelic, meaning cave. And in addition to the woods, there are also prehistoric stones with cup and ring marks, which were carved in order to catch blood from sacrifices or water, depending on who you ask. However, if you look at many of these carvings, they don't seem to suggest that they were sculpted to catch blood. Many believe that they display a mystical symbolism of lifetime, death, afterlife, like the whole natural circle. Some of the most prolific stories about the woods are about demons that inhabit the area. Now, this was wrote way back in the 1700s, so demons is anything, isn't it? From a quick running figure to voices within the trees. But it says these demons were believed to lurk in the many caves and cracks scattered throughout the woodland. Walkers and hikers have reported feelings of a powerful presence and a sense of unease that intensifies the deeper they travel within the woods. The shapes seem to tend and blend within the shadows. They melt into the natural background of the trees and shrubs. Other witnesses report an overwhelming feeling of not only being watched, but of being followed. The woods have a reputation as a home for the seed. The fairy folk is a Celtic name for a mischievous, not very nice kind of imp or sprite, the seed, and a kind of nature spirit. Human apparitions have also been seen, but who these people are or what the historical time they came from is unknown. Whether these sightings and sensations are the work of demons, or any other form of being, no one can say. Nevertheless, the ancient legends and stories of the woods are still causing a few hearts to skip a beat, even today. And it's one of the strange things that you come across when you're researching and looking, for Bigfoot things. You read something like that and you think, well, if that feelings of being watched, feelings of being shadowed, figures that blend into shadow and melt within, the trees, is quite intriguing to somebody like me who's interested in things like that. And then we get very strange ones that are still in the same area. And this happened in 2016. And it was a black leaping creature. And it was a report that was sent to Charmaine Fraser. And it came in on the 31st of July. And it was sent regarding a possible sighting of a British Bigfoot. Charmaine consequently went and investigated the area, and she found a very strange structure that had been built around that spot. And the gentleman said, "Hello, I just wanted to contact you to tell you about a sighting my wife had last Sunday evening at about 7:30 p.m. whilst driving along a wooded section of the A926 near Ailth towards Kirriemoor. I was driving and I didn't see anything, but my wife was in the back and she suddenly said, 'Did you see that?' She said she saw something a distance ahead on the verge of the road within the dense woodland that she initially thought was a man walking, but then it leaped further into the woods very quickly and stopped. She said it looked black like a shadow and it was tall and wide. She said she got the impression it was about to cross the road and then it leapt deeper into the woods upon hearing the car approaching. She was a bit shaken up and she said her hair was standing up on end. And I probably would have turned the car around and had a good look myself if it was just me and the wife. But my auntie was in the car and she'd been woken up by the commotion and she was not impressed. She's considered other logical normal reasons, such as a deer or a hiker, but she didn't believe that they could look like what she saw. Anyway, it may just have been an optical illusion, that something normal seemed unusual. But I thought I'd tell you about it, as I understand you're researching this phenomenon. And that's something that comes up a lot, this creature that's at the side of the road that suddenly darts back into the woodland, as if it's heard you approaching, you know, and it needs to get away. And something else that comes up over and over again are these kind of little cabin attacks. You hear of these places where people are staying, hikers or mountaineering people that are staying in the area, and they talk of stones being thrown. That's something that comes up in Bigfoot research all the time. Thrown at houses or cabins. And this again was 2014, so only recently, not that long ago. And it was summer of 2014, and it was a strange incident. And that was mentioned during a conversation in January 2015 that was reported to me a few weeks ago by one of the party. It would be around August or September of 2014. A renovation was taking place at an old cottage near the bridge of Balgate, Glenleo. And the cottage had apparently been abandoned for over 50 years before being bought, and a company was brought in to overhaul the property, so to flip it, to get it ready for resale. At the time, 2 of the workmen were working there every day and decided it would be easier to stay there instead of travelling back and forth to Perth. They stayed for 3 nights, during which they were disturbed every night by strange howls coming from outside and thumps like something was landing on the roof of the cottage. The men were freaked out by these noises and they stopped staying there, thinking it was a ghost or something. When they came to take down the old guttering, they found numerous rocks in them. The local wood had been described as creepy, and the men have endured some ridicule about the ghost ever since. Now, if you're into Bigfoot or cryptids or hominid research or any of that, rocks on top of a roof and a cabin in the middle of nowhere that's suddenly attacked by something that howls and screams to try and scare you out of there is not that far removed from, you know, a Bigfoot account. If I described that in America or anyone else, you would instantly say, oh no, Bigfoot. And here's another one that's really similar. Now this happened, he says, some years ago, but he doesn't actually put a date on it, so I'm not really sure. The original source is from Trish Hale, and Trish Hale runs a mountaineering and wild camping kind of forum, blog, that kind of thing. And some years ago now, this gentleman says, myself and my friends decided to do a wild camp at the foot of Ben Nevis and walk the mountain the next day, spending the following night sleeping rough on the mountain, which I thought would be a nice little adventure and give us something to talk about for years to come. On our first night, camp was pretty uneventful. The second night, things changed. Sleeping in a damp cold bivvy is not at all pleasant. But I did finally drop off to sleep, but I woke up for some unknown reason in the middle of the night. As I lay awake, I could hear footsteps walking around us. At first, I was quite interested in this, as I thought an animal of some description had come to pay us a visit. But as the time went on, I began to realise this was definitely a 2-legged creature with quite purposeful steps. The footsteps by now were really close, only a couple of feet away from the tent, and I started to get the chills. I had a massive fear come over me. Given my colleagues were also only a couple of feet away, I had no real reason to worry. Apart from anything else, they were quite big and strong. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep, and I remember waking up at around 6 o'clock in the morning, with ice covering the outside of the bivvy. So I decided to pack everything up and walk to the campsite for a well-deserved lovely hot shower. The other 2 eventually packed their equipment and followed me down the mountain. Dean, one of the lads, complained heavily about my kicking him in the head as his bivvy was on the ground at my feet. Simon, complete with smoking jacket and cravat, said he slept like a baby. I only briefly thought in passing about the footsteps creeping around us during the night, but I put it down to being overtired and possibly being awoken in half slumber, where dreams get mixed up with reality, and therefore it didn't feel it necessary to tell the others. Having got ourselves nice and clean with the warm clothes, it was time to make our way back south, and the drive was as usual monotonous, especially when we arrived at the M16 motorway. By then, we had run out of things to talk about, until Dean said, "Did you hear any footsteps walking around us last night?" And at this point I realised I hadn't dreamt it after all. We discussed this for a while, and none of us could explain it. Simon simply did not hear it, as he slept right through, and Dean, to this day, has never given it much thought. I still have no idea what it was. And this was some years ago now. We'll never know, only that it was a strange experience. We had a safe journey home, and true to his word, Dean's never walked on a mountain again. For my part, it was something I would have missed. It's something I wouldn't have missed for all the world, and I look back on that little adventure with such fond memories. But I still have the bivy bag, and I've not slept in it since. Simon, given he didn't hear the footsteps, has not given it a second thought. Writing this, I still get the chills about who or what it may have been. And I wish I could tell her. I wish I had an answer for her. I don't know. Was it Isabella's giant? Does he cover that much ground? Do they stay, in just one area and never go anywhere else? Or do they travel across the country and migrate? We really don't know. But as you pan out from that area, I'm just going to have a little count now while we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 21 accounts that are around that area, so I could continue just reading through them, but it's just absolutely amazing. At the top of Dramoctor, we've got 2 individuals that we're seeing crossing the road, and if we follow that lock system down, we have 2 individuals in 2016. The gentleman says, "I'd like to report an incident that happened to me in Argyll, Scotland, one of my favourite places to be. It was down one of the single track roads that runs between Tainhull and Deloish, on the road that runs along the side of Loch Awe. There are miles and miles of forestry tracks that you can walk along. It's a good place to be if you want solitude. You can walk for hours without bumping into anyone. There are tracks and trails that crisscross in the area, and it's a short walk from Loch Ative and Loch Awe. It has multiple places to go off track and just enjoy the time out in nature. Although I do question walking alone after seeing what I can only describe as a hunting party of 2 out there on the road that night, something I will never forget. It happened on a cool night around 1 a.m. on March 2016. I was driving back from a friend's house after an evening of chat, and I was sober and in good spirits. I was alone in the car, and at this point I was driving through the older parts of the forest. I noticed a movement, luckily, as I was driving, suddenly from my left-hand side. I was startled by a deer running across the road and running out as fast as it could. I didn't have time to think what was chasing it. I looked back to see, and it was being followed by a large man-like creature, really tall, very hairy, and he was running, and he was moving at a fast pace. He took one long stride across the road, and without thinking, I stopped, eyes fixed on this running man. You see, this thing, as soon as I hit the brakes and turned to look where it had come from out of the trees, when out to my left I saw what looked like another one. This figure was smaller, younger, and not so big, but a wild man type thing all the same. It wasn't looking at me, but was looking towards where the bigger one ran into the trees. I couldn't believe what I had just seen to this day. I did get a good look at both of them. The moon was out, it was clear and crisp. It's not like I could have mistaken them. They looked like 2 wild men hunting. So until next time, thank you for joining me on the Crypto Realm. And the Crypto Realm is brought to you by the Paranormal UK Radio Network. My name is Deborah Hatswell, and I will be back next week to talk to you again. So good night, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. I wish you all of love in the world. Blessings. Good night.